Hello, aspiring hunters. Welcome to the Hunter Experience. Gon's transformation during his confrontation with Neferpitu represented the most extreme moment of sacrifice and power ever seen in the series. A moment where the protagonist transcended all known human limitations to reach the peak of his physical potential. But one question remains. If this adult Gon had faced Meruem in his final state after his emotional evolution and rebirth through Yuppie and Poof, would there be any real possibility of victory? I think that to answer this, we need to examine not only the feats demonstrated by both, but the very nature of their powers and how they contrast within the spectrum of Hunter x Hunter. If you're prepared for the incredible Hunter journey, click like and subscribe to the channel to join our troop. Don't forget to comment on who your favorite character is in Hunter x Hunter. Now, let's continue with this incredible story. First, it's essential to understand what Gon's adult form truly represented. It wasn't just an increase in strength or speed, it was the materialization of decades of growth compressed into a single instant of desperate fury. His body was biologically altered, his muscles rebuilt, his bones lengthened, and his nen reached densities that even P to a royal guard designed to be physical perfection found terrifying. However, I believe there is a crucial difference between Gon in this state and Meruem. While the former reached his peak through a self-destructive pact, the latter was born as the living embodiment of limitless evolution. Meruem, after absorbing the powers of Yuppie and Poof, reached a stage where not only was his physical strength unmatched, but his cognitive ability and adaptability transcended anything human. His battle against Netero showed that he could learn incredibly complex combat patterns in mere seconds, anticipating even the movements of someone who had trained for decades just to defeat him. I think that's the decisive factor. Adult Gon might have comparable raw power, maybe even superior momentarily, but he would lack the strategic versatility and continuous evolution that Meruem demonstrated. Another crucial point is duration. Gon's adult form was fleeting by nature, a last resort that burned his own life as fuel. Meruem, on the other hand, was in his natural state of power, with no urgency or imminent exhaustion. Even if Gon managed to inflict significant damage, would he have enough time to actually bring down the king of the ants before his body collapsed? The battle against P2 was short and decisive, but Meruem was in a whole other category. A being who survived Netero's zero hand, a technique that concentrated a lifetime of training. Gon's adult form was fleeting by nature, a last resort that burned his own life as fuel. Meruem, on the other hand, was in his natural state of power, with no urgency or imminent exhaustion. Even if Gon managed to inflict significant damage, would he have enough time to actually bring down the king of the ants before his body collapsed? The battle against P2 was short and decisive, but Meruem was in a whole other category. A being who survived Netero's zero hand, a technique that concentrated a lifetime of training into a single strike. There's also the matter of specific abilities. Adult Gon primarily displayed overwhelming physical strength and a primitive yet powerful control of Nen, focused on his Jajanken. Meruem, however, not only had comparable strength, but also unique abilities such as aura absorption and the ability to fly. In a prolonged confrontation, I believe this difference in versatility would become increasingly apparent. Gon would fight with the fury of a human who achieved the impossible. Meruem would fight with the calm efficiency of a being who had never known limits. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this comparison is the psychological one. Gon, even in his adult form, still acted on emotion rage, pain, revenge. Meruem, after meeting Komugi, had evolved beyond mere brutality, reaching a level of strategic coldness mixed with an almost philosophical understanding of combat. I believe this fundamental difference would make it impossible for Gon to deceive or surprise him the way he did with P2. The King of the Ants wouldn't underestimate his opponent. He would study, analyze, and adapt instantly, as he did against Netero. However, there's one variable that cannot be ignored: the surprise factor. When Gon transformed, even P2, created to be the perfect guardian, was genuinely terrified by what stood before her. If Meruem had never faced anything that so drastically challenged his innate supremacy, who's to say even he wouldn't hesitate for a moment upon seeing a human violently transcend their own limitations? That instant of doubt could be the one opening Gon would need for a decisive attack. The battle would begin with a seismically simple impact. Gon charging in with a modified Jajanken, Meruem countering with a calculated blow. The initial clash would create a crater in the ground, but the result would be inconclusive. Both, if Meruem had never faced anything that so drastically challenged his innate supremacy, who's to say even he wouldn't hesitate for a moment upon seeing a human violently transcend their own limitations? That instant of doubt could be the one opening Gon would need for a decisive attack. The battle would begin with a seismically simple impact. Gon charging in with a modified Jajanken, Meruem countering with a calculated blow. The initial clash would create a crater in the ground, but the result would be inconclusive. Both would retreat intact, assessing each other for the first time. I believe that moment of recognition would be crucial. Meruem, used to seeing humans as inferior, would immediately realize this was no ordinary opponent. His eyes would widen slightly upon sensing Gon's aura density, comparable to his own, but with a wild quality, absent from his own biomechanical perfection. Gon, on the other hand, wouldn't hesitate. His adult state is pure physical determination, with no room for doubt or dialogue. He would attack again, this time with a series of modified Rokus not the childish punch from before, but fluid strikes that combine a hunter's killing precision with the brute force of a beast. Meruem would block or dodge most of them, but one or two would strike his torso, making him bleed for the first time since his rebirth. Perhaps this would cause a genuine expression of surprise on his face. After the first few minutes of physical exchange, Meruem would begin to adapt. His analytical mind, capable of breaking down combat patterns in microseconds, would identify that Gon operates primarily with linear attacks, powerful but predictable. The King of the Ants would start incorporating circular movements into his defense, using his ability to fly to create distance when needed, and then closing in with angled attacks that would force Gon to constantly reposition. However, I think Gon would surprise Meruem here. His adult form is not just brute force, it's the manifestation of years of combat experience he never lived, but that his body seems to instinctively remember. When Meruem tried to pin his arms for a finishing blow, Gon would use an unexpected variation of John to escape, twisting his torso in ways a normal human body shouldn't be able to. This would be the first moment Meruem realized he was fighting something that defied even his understanding of anatomy. After 15 minutes of intense combat, an eternity in high-level battles, the fundamental differences would begin to show. Gon, despite his overwhelming power, would show the first signs of wear, his white hair beginning to darken at the roots, his aura pulsing irregularly. Meruem, noticing this, would try to prolong the confrontation, using his endurance advantage. This is where the battle would take a philosophical turn. Meruem, now understanding that Gon was literally burning away his own existence to fight, would begin to question the meaning behind it all. Why would a being with such power choose to dissipate himself like this? He would ask, genuinely intrigued. Gon, in his altered state, would respond only with another attack, but this time, slower, less precise. In the final moments, Gon would gather his remaining strength for one last Jajanken, focusing not only his remaining aura, but also the very heat of his disintegrating body. Meruem, recognizing the threat, would counter with his own concentrated attack, wings spread wide, aura vibrating at its highest frequency. The clash would create an explosion visible for miles, followed by a deafening silence. When the dust settled, we would see Meruem still standing missing an arm and with his exoskeleton cracked in multiple places, wounded as never before but alive. Gon, a few meters ahead, already reverting to his childlike form, unconscious but breathing, his body having reached the absolute limit without fully disintegrating. Meruem, looking at the boy who had for a few moments challenged him as an equal, would not finish the job. Just as he had spared Komugi for seeing value in her fragility, he would see in that fight something that transcended mere combat, a sign that even inferior beings could, under extreme circumstances, touch the divine. He would walk away, leaving Gon alive not out of mercy, but because that confrontation had given him something more valuable than any victory. The answer that evolution is not a destination, but a journey with infinite possibilities. And Gon, waking up days later with no memory of what had happened, would carry in his invisible scars the proof that, for a brief moment, he had stood on the same plane as the most powerful being his world had ever known. Not as an equal, but as a mirror, reflecting a painful truth that all power has a price, and that some limits exist not necessarily to be surpassed, but to be challenged. Yes, folks, it's highly unlikely that Gon, even in his adult form, could defeat Meruem. Meruem's physical, mental, and strategic superiority, combined with his adaptability and resilience, make him an almost invincible opponent. Even with Gon's overwhelming power and the element of surprise, Meruem would likely overcome his opponent's limitations and eventually emerge victorious. Adult Gon might inflict significant damage at first, but his power would be fleeting and unsustainable. Meruem, with his superior resilience and intellect, would probably recover quickly, neutralizing any temporary advantage Gon could muster. Ultimately, the battle would serve as proof that even at the peak of his abilities, Gon could not compete with Meruem's innate power and ever-evolving nature. Thus, while the fight between Gon and Meruem would be one of the most epic and intense battles Hunter x Hunter could offer, Meruem's victory seems the most logical conclusion, given the disparity between the two in terms of skill, endurance, and intelligence. Hunters, that was our video for today. Leave a like if you enjoyed our video, subscribe to the channel as it is still very new, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then.